Hi guys, Johannes here. Welcome to this video about the 6 most common reasons why your photos might not be sharp. So let's get into it. Welcome to this video. If you don't know me, my name is Johannes and I am a photographer and videographer based in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I do a lot of street photos, POV style on this channel, but also general videos about camera gear and settings and how to get sharp photos, tutorials, product videos and animation. So please subscribe if you like any of these things. That will really be appreciated. Number 1. Your shutter speed is too low. Shutter speed is basically the mechanic that freezes time in your photo. And if you set it too low, then you will get motion blur. And a general rule here is the faster the subject, the faster shutter speed you need. There's this basic thing that you could remember is that you always need to have the shutter speed twice as the amount of the lens you're using. So for instance, at the moment I'm shooting on a 20mm, then I would need the double of that in the shutter speed, which will be 1/40th of a second, which I don't think is possible. So then it might be 1/48th of a second or 1/50th of a second. And if we take another example, like using the 85mm lens, then you would need the double of 85, which would be 170. Again, this is not possible in the camera, I think, so you would need to use like 1/180 or like 1/200th of a second to be sure that you are freezing time to get a sharp photo. But remember, these are just like rules of thumbs. Never be afraid to go too high, but keep in mind, if you get a really high shutter speed, then you lose light in your photo and you need to do something to get the light back, like cranking up the ISO or adjusting the aperture. Speaking of aperture, number 2, you're using the wrong aperture. So we see a lot of photographers and people in general that are really obsessed about getting really blurry backgrounds with bokeh and a shallow depth of field. But this also makes it harder for you to get your subject in focus. So if you use a very low f number like 1.8 that I can use on my 20mm here, then the risk of not getting my subject in focus is getting really high, because it will only focus on a really shallow part of the image. Instead, if I crank up the aperture to like 5.6, it will focus on a larger area. And how this works is that, let's say my focus point is on the eye here. If I only have 1.8, it might only be focusing on a really small part around the eye. And if I miss this just a tiny bit, like for instance here on the nose, then this will be the point in focus. But if you use a higher f number like 5.6, it will focus like in 3D space with more depth. So it will both be focusing on the nose tip and on the eye. So again, don't be afraid to use a higher f-stop number or a lower aperture to get more of your picture in focus and perhaps lose a bit of the blurriness on the background. But let's put it this way, what do you want the most? Do you want a really blurry background with a subject that is not in focus, or do you want a little less blurry background but with a subject in focus? Number 3, you're not using the correct focus mode. So your camera comes with different modes that it can use to focus. Cameras are really good at focusing these days, but they do miss. And if you pick the wrong focusing mode, then there's a bigger chance that you will miss your shot. So I will just go through the most commonly used, and I will tell you how these works, and then I will tell you the one that I used and why. And let's just start with this one. This is AFC, or autofocus continuously. This works this way, that when you press down the shutter button, then the camera will continue to acquire focus. So it will look around in the field of view, and it will try to pick the subject that it thinks that you want to be in focus. So this, I think, is working really well on the Sony cameras, but of course sometimes they do fail. And that might happen if you are trying to focus on something that is behind another object. Then your camera might think that it has to focus on the front object, or also if something is moving a bit too fast for the camera, sometimes it will try to focus on a different area. Or if you have a subject passing through the frame, then it will acquire that subject and trying to focus on that. So you have to keep this in mind if you are in these kind of situations, that it might be better to pick another autofocus mode or focus mode. Then you have autofocus single shot, and for this it will just try to focus on a single point on the camera. And this is really great if you have a subject that don't move or don't move too much, or if you're trying to keep the subject in the same part of the frame and trying to capture the subject in the same part of the frame. Then we have a manual mode, and I don't use this that much, but this is really good if you are trying to acquire like finer details or macro shots where you need to pinpoint the focus really into details. Then you can use manual focus, and again this would be better for still objects, because if things are moving then you need to be really good at manual focus to nail it. But you can practice this, of course, if you want to get better at it. Then there is also autofocus automatic, and basically what this does is that it picks between autofocus single point and autofocus continuously. And I will never use this because your camera cannot tell what you want, so simply just pick AFC or AFS depending on the situation. And as I mentioned earlier, I mostly use AFC because here on the Sony camera I have a touch screen, so if I want the camera to single focus on an area, I can just press the screen where I want it to focus, then it will switch to autofocus single shot mode, and it will try to focus on this area. So this works really great for me. Speaking of focus area, number 4 is about picking the wrong focus area. This is related to the autofocus functions, because you can tell the camera that you wanted to acquire focus in a certain area of the screen. So I will take you through the options you have with the Sony camera. I think that these options are more or less the same on like Canon or Fuji, and if not, then try to read the manual of the camera, and I think you can relate this to what I'm saying. So we have wide, and this will use all the autofocus points that your camera have. This depends on the camera, but these days cameras have a lot of autofocus points, so this basically means like using the whole part of the screen to try to acquire the subject that you want to be in focus. Then we have zone, and this is like picking a smaller area that you want the camera to track, and then you can use your joystick to move this area around. This works really great if you know that your subject is going to be in a certain part of the photo and it's still moving around. Then you can tell the camera that here on the upper right corner I know my subject will be, so just keep trying to track this area and find the subject for me. Then you have like center focus, and this is just focusing on the center, and yeah, this can be great if you know that you're going to have your subject in the center and you don't want the camera to hunt around and trying to acquire focus elsewhere. So an example of this was that I was out shooting the Tour de France a couple of weeks ago, and I had a lot of persons moving in front of the photo, and my camera really couldn't decide where I wanted the focus to be, because the subject that I was going to focus on wasn't in the frame for that long of time. So it kept focusing on crowd that was like in the right part of the photo, whereas I wanted the camera to focus on the center, or perhaps on the more left part of the focus. So here you could use like center focus if you knew that the bike rider would be in the center of the frame, or you could use like zone focus and take the zone to like the left part, so it would not focus on the part where the crowd was. And the last thing is called flexible spot, and this is like a combination of the zone and the center focus, because you will get a small spot where the camera will try to acquire focus, but you can move this spot around and pick areas of on the screen that you want the camera to focus on. And these are of course small areas like the center spot, and this could be useful if you are trying to acquire a really particular point of focus, like for instance a person's face. Then you could use this mode and make sure that the point is on the person's eye. Then if the person moves, then you can adjust the point or adjust your camera and keep making sure that this is on the eyes. But yeah, like most cameras have these days, they have auto eye detection, and if you don't have eye detection you might have face detection, and these kind of modes works really great on the Sony bodies at least. But yeah, sometimes they fail, so you might need to use another mode. And I think on Sony cameras, if you have more than one subject in the frame, then your camera sometimes get confused upon which face you want to focus on. I will usually just use the touch control on the screen to acquire the focus if the camera doesn't know how to work this out. Personally, I use eye focus and face detection a lot, and if the camera doesn't know what I'm doing or what I want it to do, then I will use the touchscreen to reacquire focus where I want it to be. Number 5. This is about light or low contrast light. Light or lighting have a huge influence on how we perceive an image. Low contrast lighting like backlighting can make the image perceive a bit unsharp or softer, so be aware of this. This could for instance happen if you are shooting in sunlight and you're having the sun behind a person, then this might make your photo seem less sharp or a bit more soft. If you try to angle your light in a 45-degree angle, this will create a bit more contrasty light situation, and it will make your photo seem more sharp and add contrast to your photo. Then you have direct lighting, which will bring out edge details and texture. And of course you have a combination of these things, but you need to practice this to make sure what works. So number 6 is that you don't shoot enough. This is really simple math. If you shoot less photos, then the chances are that you get less photos in focus and sharp. So don't be afraid to shoot a lot of photos and have a higher chance to get your photos in focus and sharp than if you're not. You can always delete these later in post. For instance, what I do sometimes is that I change the shoot mode to burst. So when I press the shutter, it will take several photos in a really short time, and there's a bigger chance that I will get the shot in focus. Again, as I said earlier, I was out shooting the Tour de France, and here I changed the shutter mode to a higher burst because I wanted the camera to take more photos when the bike riders was passing by, to make sure that at least some of the photos was in frame. And of course this way I ended up taking like 600 photos, but I got more photos in focus this way than I would have if I haven't done this. So here you have it. These were 6 reasons why your photos might not be that sharp. Remember to subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up, it really helps a lot. And if you have any other advice that I didn't mention here, make sure to leave it in the comment section so that other people watching these videos might learn about it and learn from you. That's all for now, and take care my friends. I will see you around. Boy.